Hello and welcome back to UnHerd. Overnight, we've been looking at results from the Romanian presidential election, where, surprisingly, at least to many, the liberal pro-EU candidate Nicolae Dan triumphed by nearly 10 points over the populist right-wing candidate George Simion. This may sound like a faraway poll in a faraway nation, but actually what's happening in Eastern Europe, right up there close to Russia and at the center of the EU's future, suddenly Romania really matters, and we really need to tune in and work out what's going on there. For that reason, our very own Aris Roussinos has been on the ground for the past 2 weeks in Romania, talking to people, finding out what is really happening, and he joins us now from Bucharest. Hi, Aris.
Good morning, Freddie.
So you were there not only with the losing candidate, George Simion, last night, but also you spent time with the winning candidate. Sounds like quite a surprising and momentous evening.
Yeah, it was a momentous and historic evening for Romania, certainly. When I came here 2 weeks ago, it seemed a shoo-in for George Simion, essentially. Everyone anticipated a Simion victory. Simion was very confident. Even Simion's kind of political opponents, I suppose the deputy leader of the Social Democratic PSD party, who was basically resigned to the fact that Simion seemed certain to win, and that a lot of his party's voters would go to Simion. From about a week ago, following a debate in which Dan did well and Simion did less well, the polls narrowed until by the point of the election night itself last night, it was looking 50-50. Though when I spoke to George Simion on Saturday, he was telling me he was very confident of a 10-point lead. He said he's going to win a landslide.
Let's listen to that clip. I think we've got that now. Let's just pull that up.
Last time I saw you, it looked almost certain. Everyone's expecting your victory to be certain.
Yeah.
The polls have tightened since then. What happened?
The polls are not really reliable in Romania. You could see one exit poll, 30%, they said, and I took 41%. The situation will be similar in Sunday's race. They will say at the exit poll 50-50 final result, and we are expecting somewhere about at least 10 points difference between me and my opponent.
So you're hoping for 60%?
10% difference means 55% to 45, but we can have this scenario with 60 to 40, yes.
Right, so as you say, he's sounding very confident there. He gets the margin right, around 10 points, but unfortunately for him, it went the other way. Let's listen to this second clip in your conversation with him, because already some kind of suggestion of electoral malpractice or interference is emerging, which is quite a common thing from these kind of populist parties. Let's have a listen.
We have some fraud problems in the Republic of Moldova with electoral transport of people with official cars of the administration in the Republic of Moldova. They are using administrative resources just to help my counter candidate, my adversary. It's not a pleasant thing to do. Also, the French have used their ambassador to actively campaign here. I don't have a problem with Mr. Macron supporting my opponent. It's normal. But I have a problem with breaking the diplomatic protocol and having the ambassador and the diplomacy involved in domestic elections. And of course, there is the problem of 1,500,000 dead people that are on the electoral list.
Okay, so in that second clip, he's raising these ideas which you might say are kind of familiar from Trump world. In fact, he's got a Make America Great cap sitting on the desk beside him. He's talking about deep state or an establishment or a system that is geared against him. There's some suggestion there, which will be interesting to see if we hear more of in coming days, that there was somehow shenanigans with the Moldovan vote, and even the French ambassador is accused of election meddling or interference. Do you think that's going to be the next stage of this, that the losing party is going to cry foul?
He has conceded defeat. At one point last night, it was looking uncertain that he was going to concede defeat. Party insiders were talking about contesting the results, asking for a recount, taking it to the Constitutional Court. There's rumours that perhaps there'll be a protest or something.
At one point he tweeted, "I am the new president of Romania,"
He did.
which seemed a little bit hasty, to say the least. But
Well, I mean, obviously he wasn't proven right by events, but I think in the end, the margin by which Simion lost was much larger than anyone anticipated, really. So it made, whatever the veracity of his claims of some kind of electoral interference or meddling, that kind of 10-point lead is very, very difficult to argue against. And I think, it would not be a strong case for him.
you then caught up with him after the result. This is after he had, I think, officially conceded. Very different tone. Let's just play that clip. This is where he's talking to supporters who are gathered, I presume, in a hotel room. Let's have a listen.
It has been a privilege for me to be your friend and a leader in this fight. I will fight together with you in all the battles we have ahead of us. This war is just starting.
Even that clip there, I mean, at that moment, it was unclear whether that was actually a concession speech or it seemed quite ambiguously phrased. But about an hour later, he did actually formally concede. And that was the end.
Because he was saying the fight goes on there, that he will continue to take the fight to the opponents.
Yeah, exactly. So it is ambiguously phrased, but yeah.
As our intrepid reporter, you then just walked down the street and started spending time with the winning candidate's supporters and caught up with the winning candidate, I guess, President-elect Dan. Let's hear what he had to say.
What would you say to Simion's voters?
No, first of all, my respect. And secondly, we have to rebuild the trust of all Romanian people in the Romanian authorities. And that moment we will have only one society, not two.
So he's talking there about uniting the country, the end of two Romanias. That's been his big theme throughout this election. Was that what was successful? Do we know what about his campaign ended up turning voters' minds?
It's unclear to me, at least, what swung it so decisively for Dan at the end. Obviously, kind of liberal, pro-European voters are very strongly kind of consolidated around him, even if he wasn't necessarily the candidate they would have chosen at first. Initially, he was seen as very aloof. He's, a kind of rather distant, kind of awkward maths professor before he became the mayor of Bucharest. Arguably, that kind of aloof distance compared to kind of Simion's more abrasive populist approach actually seemed reassuring to voters that actually things aren't going to change too much. He's a liberal reformist. He's very popular actually as a mayor of Bucharest for preserving the city's kind of architectural heritage against developers. He is seen as a good mayor of Bucharest, and that kind of technocratic liberal reformism eventually seems to have won out against Simion's, like I say,
national populism.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it another example then of younger people in the cities being pitted against older voters in the provinces, roughly speaking, the kind of student going into professional jobs elite who are keen on more integration with the European Union and want more business opportunities and all the rest of it, versus a kind of flyover country style, more disenfranchised rural voter? Is that the same kind of opposition that we've been talking about ever since Brexit and before? It's still going on in Romania?
That's certainly a strong aspect of it. And speaking to kind of jubilant Dan supporters yesterday, they were, young, middle class, spoke perfect English in a way that, Simion supporters in the countryside didn't necessarily. So I was up in Transylvania last week, which has a large Hungarian minority. And in one village I was staying at, which was predominantly a gypsy village, Romanian gypsy village, Simion posters up in the village shop was very strongly pro-Simion. In the city, Brașov, which has a large Hungarian minority, and ethnic Hungarians make up 6% of Romania's population, so that's quite a solid voter bloc. Speaking to ethnic Hungarians there, they were, very apprehensive about the possibility of a Simion victory because of his background and associations with kind of Romanian ultranationalists who've been, they put it, abusive to the Hungarian minority. So even though they were almost uniformly Orban voters, and Orban, towards the end of the campaign, came out with a kind of semi-endorsement of Simion. They overwhelmingly kind of voted for the essentially ethnic interest, which was not Simion and Dan, even though they weren't actually particularly enthusiastic about Dan himself.
So that does complicate the picture slightly. You've got a group of voters there who might like the politics, or at least they like the Viktor Orban version of it, but they think their own interests aren't served by too much nationalism. And then I guess the converse of that is the diaspora vote, because a lot of affluent people who've left Romania now live in places like the UK, they broke for Simion, which again, I guess is counterintuitive if you're trying to simplify it all to sort of upperly mobile liberals versus rural people. That didn't work for the diaspora vote. Do you have any sense of what happened there?
No, it's unclear exactly what happened, because in the first round, the diaspora essentially swung it for Simion. It was a very, very strong vote for him. That didn't come through in the same way this time. And in fact, the diaspora vote was split amongst different countries in Western Europe in a way it hadn't really been before. Obviously, the diaspora were able to mobilise, I guess, after the shock of the first round towards Dan.
So actually, do we know who won the diaspora vote yesterday?
I think Simion did, but with a lower margin. So it wasn't enough to swing the election for him in the way it was in the first round. So like yesterday evening, when the votes were coming in from within Romania, and it was all pretty much solidly for Dan, the hopes from the Simion side were that, well, the diaspora is going to be counted soon, and that will win it for us. But it didn't.
Let's have a final listen to some of the voices that you were hearing from on the streets outside, I guess, the headquarters of the Dan campaign. These are younger people who spoke very good English and who were genuinely over the moon that their candidate won. Let's have a listen.
I'm very happy and relieved, to be honest with you. This is what I feel, a great relief, because we're just continuing on the path of the European values, which I believe in, and this new president stands for these values that I believe in: education, common sense, improvement, personal development, all these things that I believe in.
We're very happy with the result. Dan, the winner, is a candidate we truly believe in, and I think he's the actual change this Romanian people needs right now, and so we're really excited about the result of the election, and we're really excited to see how things will change for the good.
I'm really happy. I voted. I didn't vote for Nicușor. I voted for people from Moldova. I voted for the Romanians from the Ukraine. I voted for Ukrainians. I voted for the pro-European ones. I didn't vote for the pro-Russian ones.
What obviously comes across very strongly in those clips is a sense that Dan represents staying on the kind of pro-European mainstream of politics. There's also strong support for Ukraine coming across from the voters. Even though Simion himself, he certainly wasn't pro-Russian in the way that a lot of the kind of external commentary made it seem, or even a lot of the kind of internal politics. If anything, he placed himself as the pro-American candidate rather than the kind of pro-European candidate. And there's an interesting kind of divide there. And Dan himself, to an extent, he represents, he's educated in France. I think he did his PhD at the Sorbonne. Even though he actually comes from a less privileged background than Simion, his parents were factory workers. He represents, to a degree, the kind of older francophone or francophile kind of European aspirational class within Romania, whereas Simion is pushing it in a more kind of populist American Trumpian direction, even though his affection for Trump was not reciprocated by the Trump administration, which kept a distance from him throughout the campaign.
So you mentioned Trump and the US there, and obviously this comes on the back of a series of elections that have swung in the non-right populist direction, Canada, Australia being two big examples. Should we chalk this up as being another sort of Trump reaction? Instead of the Trump election inspiring copycat results across the world, the opposite seems to have happened.
That could be an element of it. I think it's a problem for European kind of right-wing populists to grapple with, to what degree the Trump effect actually does work in their favour, or whether it works against them. It really must be stressed again that the Trump administration did not come out strongly for Simion, didn't endorse him. A lot of his kind of American right-wing activists on his team were expressing frustration actually at the kind of arm's length relationship that the Trump administration had with them. That JD Vance kind of spurned photo opportunities or endorsement opportunities with Simion. But I think it does ultimately come down to fractures within Romanian politics, and maybe despite the kind of strongly kind of pro-American ethos of Romania's culture after its entrance to NATO. Obviously, NATO membership is very important to lots of people in Romania. Despite that, I think there just wasn't the market for that kind of lavishly pro-Trump MAGA candidacy that Simion represented within Romanian politics.
What you said just now is interesting, which is that for voters in Romania, in a sense, this was a choice between being more European in their identity or less European and more content to live in a world of big powers with Russia in one direction and Trump's America in the other direction. Maybe that's how we should see it, that as the identity of Eastern Europe is evolving and they're making these crucial decisions. We had an election yesterday, also the first round of the Polish presidential election, where also a liberal mayor seemed to do well from Warsaw. That's sort of the choice, isn't it, for the Eastern countries, whether to cling to the European Union or whether to carve out some kind of independent identity where they are more at the mercy of the even larger powers to the east and west.
Yeah, that's definitely a strong element of it. Though I suppose I would also say that from Simion's perspective, I mean, he did get endorsement from right-wing populist leaders across Europe, and from within his team and from other kind of sympathetic Romanian political analysts, political insiders, there was a sense that Simion wasn't actually outside the developing European mainstream, that he was actually following it. A perhaps less lavishly pro-American version of Simion's kind of right-wing populism could still in the future be at the next election could still be successful within Romania. It was, I think, just the specific aspects of him as a candidate, his particular flaws in terms of his background, his past rhetoric, that ended up being just too much for the Romanian voter.
So more broadly, what do you think it means for the region? I mean, do you think we should read from this into larger trends, or do you think this is a kind of specifically Romanian tussle?
It does echo trends across Europe that, you do have, nearly half the electorate that obviously wanted, radical change, a radically different path to politics as usual. As it proved, slightly more than half the electorate, wanted to kind of stay firmly on the pro-Brussels, pro-European, pro-NATO path.
Although his mantra was change, wasn't it?
It was.
Nico Jordan, he was talking about, the voters voted for change. He's the change candidate. What's he changing to?
That's very unclear. I mean, he is obviously a liberal reformist. I think a lot of people do obviously have problems with Romania's corruption, which is endemic, with economic issues. Romania is facing a very large and alarming budget deficit. It will make any kind of stable governance difficult over the next few years, and I think that kind of popular anger that was represented first by Georgescu and then Simion kind of filling Georgescu's vacant role, that isn't going to go away anytime soon. Dan will have a very large obstacle, a task ahead of him, kind of ameliorating that. And I think there is going to be space within the next few years for potentially a new populist candidate who maybe could swing it over the end.
You mentioned Georgescu. That's the former candidate of the sister or another party of the right. And he was apparently victorious or ahead in the first round, and the results were nullified by the courts on the grounds that there was Russian interference on his side. This has become a kind of poster child for lawfare or, technocratic interference in the democratic process. You could look at today's results and say that it worked. I mean, the courts interfered. They banned the party of the right. Apparently it shifted the diaspora vote or narrowed the diaspora vote. It seemed to have had some impact. And when they rerun it, they got the result they wanted.
In the long run, yeah. But I mean, you could also say that Simion's rise was the result of kind of popular anger, that cancellation of the election. Simion's rapid rise in the polls. He basically fed off that anger at the cancellation of the election. He took over a lot of kind of Georgescu's voter base. So if that hadn't happened, then Simion probably wouldn't have become as viable a candidate in the same way. So,
right, so it cuts both ways.
Both ways, yeah.
Final thought. You've spent 2 weeks there. You've been talking to people of all ages and all political backgrounds. What's your impression of that country and what kind of the moment that they are in?
Romania is a fantastic country. In a strange way, it's one of those things that, you know, when you live in Western Europe, you kind of look at the cities around you that are increasingly squalid and feel a kind of sense of despair at Europe's path. In Eastern Europe, despite all its problems, there is also a sense of latent possibility, of a sense that these could become very prosperous, you know, very even influential in Romania's case, countries. A lot of, you know, Romanian political analysts are talking about Romania's kind of untapped potential as a middle-ranking power that has strong relationships in Africa, in the Middle East, across Eastern Europe. You know, it's really at a very kind of influential strategic position. It has industry, it has, you know, good natural resources that could be utilised in a way that haven't been utilised so far. So there's a sense that Romania's failed to live up to its potential over the past few years. It has become markedly richer as a result of kind of, you know, joining Western organisations, as part of joining the EU. But there's a sense that it could do even better still, that it could be a potential, you know, new Poland people talk about. I think that's a fair assessment.
Very interesting. Aris, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
That was UnHerd's Aris Roussinos, who's been on the ground for the past couple of weeks in Romania, Bucharest, around the provinces up to Transylvania and the rest of it, really reporting on important trends that are happening in Romania and across Eastern Europe, where populations are deciding what the future of their country is going to be. Will it go back to being EU-facing, looking for a more liberal, progressive, metropolitan, you might say, future as a core part of the European Union? Or are they looking for something else? Is it more nationalistic? Is it more populist? Maybe even Trumpian or friendly with Putin's Russia? These are the big questions, and we're seeing the same questions being asked across that region. And in a sense, it matters to all of us because what they decide will affect the future of the whole of Europe. Thanks to Aris, and thanks to you for tuning in. This was UnHerd.